enlightening. We are going to be talking about disruptive military technology. And over the past 4, 5, 6 months, I've been struck by the number of times where I have watched reports, documentaries, or some sort of show that dealt with emerging technology that is really transforming the way in which warfare takes place nowadays. But then I began thinking about that's always been the case. From the very beginning of time, technology has always transformed the battlefield. I throw stone, you pick up stick. I invent bow and arrow, you invent musket. So kind of back and forth, the innovation and the counter technology. So there's always been scientific breakthroughs that have happened. But some of the breakthroughs that are taking place nowadays are much different in their impact and breadth of how they're transforming warfare. And it's even changing some of the principles of warfare that we have talked about in here for long periods of time. So we're going to kind of talk about historically what is disruptive military technology, look at it briefly from a historical perspective, and then take a look at what's going on now and how that's going to be changing what has been traditional ways of viewing combat and warfare. So there's no agreement whatsoever in this area exactly what disruptive military technology is. I could not find one list that had the same items on it, even going back to the beginning of time. So we're going to define it, we're going to talk about it, and there is room for discussion and whatabouts in this tonight, because historians and even technocrats today disagree about what is transformative military technology. But some of the things I want you to think about are some of the things that we are learning that's going on around the world about different weapon systems and styles of warfare that are taking place right now in the world. And we've got trench warfare, right? Where's trench warfare taking place? Ukraine. Yeah, the Ukraine is, we've got static lines that really haven't moved all that much. On the other hand, you've got incredible technology on both sides that are being utilized. The first use of a hypersonic missile has been during this Russian-Ukrainian war. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but drones are taking a tremendous role in this. And then, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, I was watching the news and an Apache attack helicopter got struck by a Iranian Shahed drone, which failed to explode. And so the pilots were in the drink. And what rescued them?
Unmanned drone.
A drone. Yeah, it's called a Corsair naval sea drone. And I was like, that fits in perfectly with what we're going to be talking about tonight. But one of the things that 6 months ago I ran across was this. I don't know if you can really, the further you get away, the better it is. Can you see what's underneath all that? A tank. And it looks like there's like burlap strings hanging off of it. But this is a Russian, what the Ukrainians have called dandelion tank. Has anybody heard of these before? Yeah. This is what the Russian response was to drone technology attacking and javelin missiles attacking their tanks, is to weld these spiked metal dandelions all over the outside of their tanks to take out the drones before it can actually hit the armor of the tank. Huh. And it's essentially a very, very low technology that's been used to counter this drone threat. So I don't know if drones are really the disruptive military technology that they are. We can talk about that, we can debate that in the future, but what has always been a back and forth about disruption and who has the edge in military technology. There's a poet, Hilaire Belloche, and he wrote a satirical poem in 1898 called The Modern Traveler. And this is a very famous Victorian era quote. And it says, "Whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun and they have not." And it was used as kind of a satirical line to talk about the fact of superior European military technology and the fact that the non-European third world couldn't deal with the technology. And we would always have the ability to outsmart and outwit and outgun, these colored people all around the world just by the fact that they had the Maxim gun. So it's kind of we're okay with where we are, but now in terms, yes, Nancy.
I have a question. You just said European technology, they thought that they could outwit all the other, like, non-white peoples of the world?
Yeah,
okay. In history, was there not a battle on the African continent between British soldiers and some African tribe, and the African tribe won?
Absolutely. There were more than several.
See, I'm a historian. I remember I don't remember the year, but I knew that, I think they were the Maasais that they were fighting, I think.
The Maasais, the Zulus?
Zulus, they said.
Yeah,
Zulus.
the Zulus in 1879.
1879?
1879, the Battle of Islandana, before they got to Wark's Drift, and almost did the same thing there. So this idea of thank you for making the point for me, is that this reliance on this technology isn't necessarily the advantage that even today the West thinks it has. So there are always countermeasures, there are always things that can be done to counteract the prevailing technology. And there's the idea that nowadays, what if the Russians, what if the Chinese jump us and jump ahead of us in terms of a substantial disruptive technology that really puts us behind the 8 ball. We here in the United States have always been very reliant upon the system of our scientific technology and advancement being way ahead, but there's going to be some times tonight where that's not necessarily the case anymore. And
again, that's why in America we need to push for everybody should have their own weapons, because if they come, you can defend your own house.
are you a Second Amendment advocate? 2 books that I researched for this particular, that were really instrumental in preparing for this, was one book by Mark Galeotti called Putin's Wars, and it is awesome because it goes all the way back through South Ossetia, Georgia, all of these wars that he's been fighting and how he fights and the new ways that he's fighting, and very instructive about the use of technology and disruptive military technology. The other book is by Andrew Krapanovich, who worked at the Pentagon for ended his career of 30 years at the Pentagon. And his thesis, or his book, is The Origins of Victory, is that the next couple of iterations of technology that take place are going to be of the sort that he who gets there first wins. In other words, the weapon systems will be so advanced, so capable, that they almost break outside what we think of in terms of normal physics and normal laws of gravity and all those kinds of things, that the person who gets there first, it's like when I worked at Joanne Fabrics. The person with the most fabric who dies wins. But this is in a technology situation.
So let's talk about what it is.
Disruptive military technology. It's scientific breakthroughs with the potential to revolutionize military operations. These technologies are not just tools for modern warfare. They serve as catalysts for reshaping defense doctrines, operational tactics, and even strategic decision-making. So that tank that I was talking about, it's having to deal with drones, right? There are those that argue that the drones and the autonomous vehicles that are being put into service now and utilized around the world, that's not a disruptive military technology. The Russians were able to weld some steel on there and deal with it. So it doesn't have that transformative effect. Now it did initially, right? We heard of hundreds of Russian tanks being decimated with these drones, and they're still being used by both sides, by Ukrainian drones. And then the Russians are using them very effectively too. Now that the Russians are using drones to hunt people on the streets of the Ukraine. I don't know if I've talked with you about that before, but they're training, when they're training their drone pilots, they are using drones to literally hunt cab drivers and buses and people walking down the streets as they train them. So they're still having that disruption, but they're not the transformative kind of thing that reshapes defense thinking. Now, it has the potential to do that, but is it really the kind of disruptive thing that we think it is? So that's kind of the definition. Any thoughts or questions about that before we kind of move to the next one? Okay. So, what it fundamentally does is it changes warfare. Okay, it's more than just a one-off kind of new weapon system. It alters the character of the warfare. It changes the balance. So when the nuclear weapon was introduced by the United States, that shifted power towards us, and it shifted the way that we think about warfare, and it made it transformed it from, at the time, in the 40s and 50s, from large-scale, global, conventional warfare to limited warfare after that. Things like Korea, Vietnam, those kinds of things, because the prospect or the thought of waging nuclear war, it was just beyond us. So it reshaped the way we thought. Deterrence, right? The idea of deterrence actually was a reshaping of that. So nuclear weapons, that would be an example of a disruptive military technology. So it redefines strategic doctrine, battlefield tactics. And we even did, in the 50s and 60s, and I just saw an article today that talked about the Chinese are now reintroducing nuclear artillery shells. We haven't had those since, what, the 50s or something like that? And so, again, changing the way we're doing business on the battlefield. And rendering long-standing defensive structures obsolete. One thing that the United States Navy is really worried about in the Pacific are these super long-range Chinese naval strike missiles that can maneuver and change direction and course on their way to the target. And what they're desiring to do is push American aircraft carriers. We've talked about that before, pushing them back outside the island chains so that they don't have the impact. So how do we deal with that? That would be another example of technology, disruptive technology. So changing the way we think about war. Does everybody remember what we've talked about Moss Mouse before? My brothers talked about this, we've had guest speakers talk about this, and I've talked about this. These are the 9 principles of warfare. Maneuver, mass, offense, unity of command, economy of force. I'm going to mess one of these up. Simplicity, security. These are the principles that essentially Karl von Clausewitz, has anybody heard of him?
Yeah.
Tom Howard. Who is Karl von
He
Clausewitz?
was a military theorist in the early 19th century. And kind of they were pulling on it for us. It's all connected to that.
And his principles and doctrine of waging war are still taught today. They're still the bedrock of most military strategists. They use these, they teach them to us as officers. This is how you need to think operationally and tactically when you are coming up with a plan of how to conduct warfare. That is actually being changed now, and there are other elements that are entering it because of some of these weapons that we've seen. So the idea of mass, having the right number or an overwhelming number of forces ready at the perfect point in time to attack the enemy and overwhelm them, is becoming less important. Whereas having a very precise weapon that can target something that would have taken, I don't know, 10, 20 bombing missions before, now can be very selectively taken out. So these weapon systems, we're looking at precision as opposed to mass. And this became very obvious during my Gulf War, the first Gulf War. And actually during Vietnam, actually, when they started using laser-guided weapons to take out bridges and things like this. But precision is really changing the way we're thinking about warfare because it can be done on a much more precise, targeted way. Physics. Weapon systems and technology and materials are being made and produced in ways that are kind of pushing the bounds of physics back. I was looking for a fabric that's called an invisibility cloak. Has anybody heard of these? Has anybody seen them?
No.
It's crazy. Look it up. Now, some of them are fake, okay? But some of them are real, and they will hold up the piece of fabric, and it will show what's behind the person, and the person is invisible.
So like a cookie device for real?
Yeah, it's like Harry Potter's magical cloak. Yes. Yeah.
For real?
For real. Yes. Those things are becoming more and more prevalent. And it's that kind of, you know, if that could be implemented, fielded, operationally, that would change the entire way we do business, right? So we're talking about autonomous vehicles, where we've talked about this before, one aircraft pilot in an F-35 will control literally 3 or 4 or 5 different aircraft that will be assigned different roles. And they will be using artificial intelligence to evaluate, adapt, respond, attack, recon, intelligence, surveillance on the battlefield under their own guidance.
Isn't Jamie Foxx in a movie with something just like that?
I don't know who Jamie Foxx is.
The actor?
You watch too much television.
It's the same concept. They had autonomous aircraft, and it went crazy. It was supposed to be under their control, and it decided to go on its own, and they had to go shoot it down.
Because so many Air Force pilots watch that movie, there's this supreme level of suspicion among Air Force pilots, for real. They don't trust these things because they'd rather have their buddy flying with them. And so it's called the Loyal Wingman program, but there it is. Autonomous drones. But let's go back to one of the first disruptive military technologies, because this was stirrups.
Stirrup.
Out of saddle. Hang on to the horse and control it.
Get up on the horse easier.
Get up on the horse easier, control the
Control the
horse
horse,
easier.
hang on to the horse too.
Guess what, the Romans didn't have it. That's after that.
There's an author, a historical author, his name's Lynn White Jr., and in 1962 he wrote a book. Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
Yeah, he wrote a book called Military Technology and Social Change.
That's right.
And it's actually one of the few medieval books that you can purchase that's still being published, even today. Anyways, his thesis,
So then what?
Lynn White Jr., Lynn White, yeah, the book's called Medieval Technology and Social Change. And his thesis is called the Stirrup Thesis. And he said that this was such a transformative military technology that it transformed Europe completely. And it led to the mounted warrior being stable, secure in the saddle because of the stirrups, being able to direct and control the horse better, and provide him with a lance. You see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
And develop that horse warrior chivalric kind of knight,
Yeah, the knights, right.
and that changed the face of Europe. And so it doesn't have to be technologically superior, it just needs to have functionality. So what military planners throughout history have said, okay, I've got this, but how do I use it? Does it change what we can do? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. The United States military arsenal is replete with weapon systems that fail to produce on the battlefield. But every military has done that. And so, anyways, it really did make things different. on the battlefield for centuries, and it comes about basically essentially in the 8th century, and up until the 1200s, 1300s, really transforms warfare, until something else shows up on the scene. Gunpowder.
Right, and gunpowder.
Transformative military technology, disruptive military technology. So you don't have to wield the old trebuchet up and throw the stones at the castle anymore. Now you blow it to bits. And the
Knock it down with cannonballs.
Ottomans
Who was
were
the,
exceptional.
who was the first to use gunpowder like that?
Well, the Chinese,
Chinese until the 12th to 13th centuries. And the Mongols started to use it too. But their big thing was their horses. With the stirrup, by the way. They could conquer more land than anyone had ever conquered in history.
The Mongol?
In the
Was it
13th.
Genghis Khan then?
Yes, Genghis Khan and his successors.
I'm trying to talk Tom into doing a lecture on that. So
Oh.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's an amazing, yeah. Look at that big gun.
this was called a bombard, right? For those of you who are,
Yeah.
do a lot of reading in this area, and the Ottoman Turks
Yeah.
used this very effectively on the battlefield. Transformed, so the siege of the castle became much more
That
definitive,
was crucial.
crucial.
Yeah, because in 1453, they had a giant gun. The barrel was so big you could walk in it. The projectile was a 700-pound stone.
That was that me?
Yeah.
Right there? What is
That
it
battered down the walls of Constantinople.
called?
The Turks had it.
What's that called?
The bombard.
B-O-M-B-A-R-D.
Yeah, that's what it did, bombard, but that's the whole of Constantinople right there. That it stood for 1,000 years.
See, this is why you need to stand up here and do this lecture time.
This is 1450. Yeah, and then,
Here's one of the questions that I ran across there was a lot of controversy about, and that is the aircraft, was it a transformative, disruptive military technology? And has it passed its point of usefulness? Is there something,
Interesting.
yeah, so, and we
I
can,
would say partially, yes. Yes.
can I play devil's advocate for a second?
Go ahead.
Okay. At Pearl Harbor, the Japanese were prepared to use a disruptive military technology in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor because they thought that our aircraft carriers were there. And had they been there, this disruptive military technology could have altered the entire, and it was essentially adding wood fins to torpedoes to make them successful in shallow waters of a harbor. So it would, they had the ability to add something to an existing technology that could have been disruptive. And had that taken place, one wonders if that would have altered people's thinking about the use of the carrier. But today, there is a debate about, do we still need to be building aircraft carriers? Is there something else that's come along that's made it more disruptive?
That's what I'm saying. I think today, considering everything that we have, I think that's such a huge target on the ocean, they probably might want to reconsider and think of something else. That's a huge target.
Yeah.
Yet the Chinese have built 3 in the last 7 years. And so it's unclear, but these are not settled arguments in terms of history. These are ongoing discussions. But here's something that I thought was interesting. These disruptive innovations frequently compel nations or military institutions to drastically rethink their operational doctrines to be successful and survive. So when we are developing a weapon system, we not only have to think about the current operational environment, but we need to think about the potential success of that and future operational environment, as well as learn the lessons from the last war. So this is the dynamic that's in place. So we're trying to learn the lessons from the previous war. We're trying to adapt and produce weapons to satisfy the existing requirement, and then implement these new innovative technologies. Questions?
So do you think that they probably will be using a lot of AI to do exactly that? Because AI can forecast, they can look at history, look at now, and then forecast.
And that's the transformative nature of the AI, because a typical Air Force pilot can process about 100 bits of information in a minute. Okay. AI can do 3 million in a second. It's not even exponential, it's just ridiculously different. So there's the idea that it can be more effective than a human. But then you're talking about an ethical issue too, aren't you? What's the ethical issue involved here?
Getting rid of people.
Well, militaries always get rid of people.
All people.
What's that?
Maybe all people.
All
You know,
people.
humans are useless. Who has replaced them?
Well, when you're taking a human out of the decision-making process,
Yeah. You're taking a human out of existence in the long run.
No, I see what you're saying.
what am I trying to get at here?
When you take a human being, okay, so I don't mean to bother other people, but I go back to scripture to answer that. We're made in the likeness and image of God. When you remove humanity out of an equation, you're taking those intrinsically placed gifts that are part of God's characteristics that are shared with God, like what is beautiful, what is good, there are things that human beings have in our heart that have been placed by God that no machine could ever understand. So you take out that human heart, that humanity.
Well, in essence, essentially, let's look at it from the other perspective. When AI is making the decision to engage a target, whatever the target is, you're taking out the human factor,
Yeah.
right? When you're essentially, I mean, it has the potential to go there. I'm not sure it's there now. I don't know. I will say that I'm fairly certain that we would be more aware and cognizant of those issues than the Chinese and the Russians would.
So,
I think so.
And there's a significant advantage then that the bad guys have over the good guys who are concerned with those kinds of issues.
an AI that actually just basically may not value human life in war. Because there are some rules, like I think Asimov had this sense about these rules of robotics. A robot cannot harm a human, but we already have intelligent machines that do harm humans. So that's kind of not a non-existent point. AI, in other words, could replace humans.
I think one of the problems here, and this is why I chose the title of Damocles Sword, there's a sword ready to drop on us, right? It's a sort of responsibility and danger, and we need to be aware that it's good to be the king, but with being the king, you have the power and the danger of decision-making and life and death.
Danger.
And AI has unparalleled speed, unparalleled decision-making, and I think the temptation is going to be very strong. Well, I think the cat's out of the bag.
It's
I
all
think,
that.
yeah. So so when you got autonomous vehicles and drones involved that are making decisions, then it becomes even more problematic.
For science, there's been a lot of science fiction about that. It goes back a long ways.
Oh, can I share? It seems like I'm talking over the side. But before I left the office, on my computer, I was scrolling through some of the news and stuff, and they came up with this thing that MIT is working on. I have these drones that are like dog-shaped with 4 legs. It's like a dog shape. And they were showing how this thing can actually walk, and they were showing like it had certain speed. They had 2 models that they're talking about. It has certain speed, things they can do, like one can carry a lot of weight. So I can see how they can do things like, just police work. go into a building and check things out, or you wouldn't want to send a van and you send it in this machine.
Yeah, there's no,
But,
oh, please.
but also that article, they were talking about, that they are trying to make these autonomous, like dog-like robotic type things, make their own decisions. Like you were saying, they make their own decisions moving around. And what would be, and that was the question, is like, what would come of this, of having an autonomous thing, they can make its own decisions when you deploy it, it just goes out and decides.
It's a good question, and that's not even that's one of the less controversial ones. When you start talking about human enhancement technology, we're going to talk about in a minute. It's one thing for a disruptive technology like the English longbow, right? What was the deal with the English longbow? Why was that disruptive?
Tremendous range.
Tremendous range. It had
Fierce armor.
pierce armor, right? So there's that kind of, but then when you're talking about integrating biologics, humans with technology to enhance capabilities and performance, you're talking about cyborg kind of stuff.
Cyborgs, that's right.
Cyborgs, yeah.
And
That's
so
in science fiction too.
it's not science fiction
Is it
anymore.
anymore?
I think
No,
it's-
it isn't.
Yeah.
Al,
Yes.
well, there was a case of, this happened recently, a self-driving car, without a driver. There was a woman crossing the street, and something happened with the car, but it hit the woman and killed her, and it wasn't supposed to do that. Yeah. And,
So who's responsible?
well,
That's the danger, but
yeah,
when I first joined the military, they were in ROTC, they were teaching about airland battle doctrine. And airland battle doctrine was how we were going to fight the war in Europe. And with the overwhelming numbers of Soviet tanks entering the inter-German border, and how
Folding gap.
the folding gap, yes, the folding gap, yep.
The what?
And how, it's a geographic feature there that makes it convenient. It's the only place really you can effectively push through divisions of tanks
Where?
in Germany, the inter-German border.
What's it called?
The Fulda Gap, F-U-L-D-A, Fulda Gap. And so it was the idea of interdicting deep behind Russian and Warsaw Pact forces, so that the follow-on, the first forces that came through would kind of be almost isolated, and to attack them in detail after you take out logistics, command, control, communications. And this no longer exists. I think I skipped ahead of a slide too much, because now, as we've seen the Russians are capable of doing, is launching something deep into NATO territory and not ever exposing their tank forces. The good thing about the Russians is they don't learn very well, which is why they've been stuck in Ukraine for 4 years. And they keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, which is good for us. But now with precision and speed and physics, they can interdict into our areas and effectively do what atomic weapons used to do. So the threat to our airline battle doctrine was this. We thought that what if the Soviets go nuclear? Now, what if the Soviets go precise? What if they start attacking things like Brussels and things like that with these longer range weapons that are non-nuclear but have essentially the same effect as a nuclear weapon? I put this in here because has anybody heard of the fishing nets from France that are in the Ukraine? Street after street after street after street have imported fishing nets old fishing nets from France, because they stop drones. It's low cost, and you drape them over the street. Looks like my daughter's bedroom when she was a little girl almost. But it's very effective. It's very effective. So there are ways to defeat threats, and there are ways of making disruptive military technology non-disruptive. And that's what I wanted, the point of those. Oh, that was a repeat slide. These are some of the emerging areas where disruptive technology is taking place. Many of these are you're already aware of some level, but I wanted to talk about just a couple of them. One of which was IoT. Has anybody heard that term before? It's the Internet of Things.
Well, yeah.
Are you aware?
Oh, most, yes.
Okay. Do you want?
I mean, I can't really, but
Okay. So the Internet of Things is essentially when everything completely takes care of itself. But think of a self. I'm missing a word. Thinking about your house, smart house, where you talk to the coffee pot, or you don't even talk to the coffee pot anymore because the coffee pot already knows because of the refrigerator that it needs to turn on the coffee when the alarm goes off. Then you see how everything is just kind of smart homes, which are all the rage now, right? With rich people. I don't know what that's like. So, well, if you think about that same concept and lift that out of a smart house and put that on a battlefield, where everything knows ahead of time what it needs to do at what time and in what place, and redundancy, and, well, if I can't talk to this command node, I'm going to go through here, 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 and then back route the information to the command node I wanted to talk to. So everything is kind of working together, and really, we don't do that much. On the way over, I talked to my car. I said, "Hey Siri, call Noel."
Well, she didn't.
Rich, who was I calling? I called someone from my car and it worked.
it sounded like her.
Is that me?
Your phone just called.
Well, we see how well that worked. That's pretty disruptive. But it's essentially making things happen so fast on the battlefield that battlefields are not going to be the battlefields that they used to be. And if there's one thing, why are you calling me now? All right. If there's one thing about the United States military, and by default most militaries, that hinders it, it's how slow it reacts and responds. It is a very Neanderthal-esque institution. The rate of change is negative, almost, with the United States military, because there are so many people who have so many vested interests in their project at a particular time, or this weapon system, and again, that process of we're learning lessons from the last war, the current war, and we're planning for the future. What do we do? How do we keep up with the Joneses? Joneskies. What the United States military is doing, and other militaries around, and our near-peer competitors are doing, is they are taking the business model of diffuse disruption, which is trying to take other things and implement them and base their decisions on the marketplace. Okay, so a marketplace has buyers and sellers, and who determines what works and what doesn't sell, what sells and what doesn't sell? Both, really, right? Both, but if it's not working, or if it's not the right color, if it's not the right size, the buyer is going to make that decision. So what they're doing is they're taking the business model of trying to predict what's going to sell or what's going to be effective on the battlefield, and implement that now and bypass all of the traditional ways, or to short-circuit the traditional ways of weapons acquisition and try to get to the program before, or to get to the weapon system and eliminate the slowness and the, we saw that in a lecture recently on the United States Marine Corps and force modernization. We talked about that. Marine Corps just got rid of its tanks. They've got a completely different mindset now. They're going to conduct warfare like they've never conducted warfare before. And so that's an example of that. Let me give you a business example. Kodak. I was in Rochester this week, and I drove by the big Kodak building, right? Kodak cameras, when I was growing up, right? Kodak was the camera growing up. And they were very successful. But along comes digital photography. Do you know who the first implementers of digital photography were?
Canon?
No. Kodak. And Kodak made the decision that this wasn't where the ball game was. They saw themselves as a chemical company. They saw themselves as a chemical company first. We're the ones that produce the chemicals to develop the pictures. We're not a camera company. So they decided not to pursue the digital route. Good decision?
No.
Now they're out of business.
Yeah, now we're out of business. So that's an example. How do our military decision makers and political decision makers decide what sells, what works, what doesn't work? And so that's where we are right now. So as this technology starts to come online, we're looking at historical examples. We're looking at the aircraft carrier. The aircraft carrier was a disruptive military technology, by the way.
Yeah.
Total. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Why? What does the carrier do that
Brings
makes it?
planes closer to it,
To the target.
area.
It brings an airfield
Yep.
anywhere it wants to in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It says, "Ciao,"
We
with
got-
about 100 military aircraft.
That's what kind of made the battleship defunct.
But for a long time,
The
there was
battleship.
an argument in the Navy that
Oh,
the
yeah.
battleship was the way to go.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
At the beginning of the aircraft carrier, they didn't even want to fund the air wing of the
Remember,
Navy.
remember Billy Mitchell?
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking.
Yeah,
What were
he
you thinking of him, Tom?
Well, I was thinking about,
Improved.
it was 1921.
he
He
proved.
used some planes to actually sink a German battleship.
Yeah, he proved that it could be
But
done.
then in 1923, he comes up with this idea that, you know, you put your Navy out there in Pearl Harbor and Hawaii, it's going to be vulnerable to air attack. And he thought, you're nuts.
Yeah.
Because there really was no such thing as an aircraft carrier.
Carrier, yeah.
Did he listen to him?
No.
No,
Did he argue with him?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did they court-martial him?
Yeah.
All right, so there's my point. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry, please.
And guess who he said the attack would come from?
Japan.
Japan.
Who's Billy Mitchell?
He was very
General-
prepared in World War I.
General Billy Mitchell, one of the most famous Air Corps generals, later to help establish the Air Force
And
and
based on what was just said, prescient
yeah.
about the aircraft.
18 years later, you know.
But it wasn't a selling point to the Navy said no.
No.
As a matter of fact, it wasn't
It
till,
wasn't even a selling point to the Air Corps.
well, no, of course not. But it wasn't until the end of World War II that the aircraft carrier won. There was a future class of battleship that was supposed to be built. It was called the Montana class. And they were supposed to be built as a successor to all of those battleships that had been built during World War II. It finally got nixed. But one must wonder if heavy battleship cruisers are the way to go, Mr. President. Just asking the question.
Well, it is
Because
a
we are in the process of designing, hold on, we're in the process of designing and developing a Trump class of battleships.
it is a lot cheaper to throw a $100,000 shell compared to a multi-million-dollar missile.
And that's ultimately kind of where where this discussion leads to.
That's what, yeah, Trump,
Because there is a cost effectiveness here too. Because some of these weapon systems are
so
very
expensive.
cost effective, some of them are cost ineffective. There is a guided laser system that's now being deployed on U.S. naval vessels that sends a laser out to destroy incoming drones and missiles. It costs $15 per round, per use. $15. As opposed to an Aegeus,
And,
millions and millions. So there's the idea that, you know,
and the,
and there are a few countries in the world that can really even
afford that.
We're having the argument because we can afford it. You know, do we, don't we? But most countries can't get it.
And the Army has had and developed, I was like back in, now, I don't know how many years now they've had it, artillery rounds that can change direction in flight. Once they leave the cannon.
So this is kind of a chart that kind of pulls into view the process of what's taking place. There's a revolution going on in technology and military affairs because of these technologies that are being pushed forward. And I mean, just if you read through that list, you're going to see just how widespread the technologies and the areas that it reaches into are. I would like to talk about the propulsion technology for just a second, real briefly to illustrate a point here, because the hypersonic missiles that are being developed right now, well, does anybody know the Mach speed of a high velocity rifle round? Okay, so a high speed rifle round like my 223 or 5.56, that's good. It travels at like Mach 2, 3, something like that. We're talking about hypersonics that travel at Mach 15 to 20.
Well, first you have, what is Mach? Mach 1.
Mach is the exceeding the speed of sound. Okay, thank you.
Miles per hour.
Yeah.
How many miles per hour?
I have no idea.
I think it's 720 miles per hour.
The
is Mach.
point is this is 5 times faster than a bullet that we're working with now. And so I want to go back to my point where I was talking about how we're pushing physics and science to an area that goes beyond what, you know, how do you shoot that down?
Exactly.
5 times faster than a bullet. So, just interesting. This is a Russian Kinzhal. It's hypersonic. This is one of the ones. This is a picture of a type that was launched into the Ukraine. It's about Mach 5, so not very fast. But now we're talking about, and then we're getting into hypersonic glide vehicles where they go into the exosphere and re-enter at plus Mach 20. On the recent Artemis rocket launch that sent the guys around the moon, I feel like a deaf interpreter up here. It was doing Mach 27 as it went in. So the capability's there, but this is, you know, when you're talking about plus Mach 20, it just gets into the ridiculous at that point. But then you go all the way, draw that all the way down to the individual soldier level, where you're doing human enhancement technologies and using exoskeletons and visual capabilities that, I mean, this is, to me, this looks almost like, what's the Terminator.
Terminator.
The kind of stuff, but where you're taking the human and you're making him into something that he isn't. And I think this is just the beginning of it. And again, if there's nations that are going to push the envelope, even if we don't, they will. So I wanted to close with this. That's the invisibility fabric that I was telling you about.
Oh, wow.
Right now, as of right now, you have to be stationary. You can't move because it doesn't have the properties that adapt to but if you're a sniper,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, what do you think, Ted?
Yeah.
You're a sniper.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah, yeah.
Alien.
It's just another level of, this is why physics is getting pushed to
Yeah.
the limit here. This is beyond the longbow and the stirrup.
This is the movie Alien.
Yeah.
The Alien had this technology.
Televisions and movies.
Because it's relevant. The television had that technology.
So, I know that even now, it's technology they have now, I mean, they can see bodies in a building because they can see the outline, but you could use it, I mean, it would still, your heat would still go through that, wouldn't it?
Right. Thank you for bringing up that point. They are developing infrared fabrics that reduce the infrared signature of a person. So even under infrared detection, their infrared signature is reduced. Can you imagine what I could have gotten away with at Joint Fabrics? I could have been in the corner all day.
Okay, just-
Where's Hal? Where's Hal? Any questions or comments?
Well, I keep referring to movies because it's funny that it happens in movies, and Star Trek is another great example,
Oh, yeah.
and then all of a sudden, it becomes fruition.
Your point is well taken because yesterday's science fiction is actually not fiction anymore. It's actually happening right now as we speak. But in a sense, mankind has always dealt with this disruptive military technology. I hope that kind of comes across to a degree. But we're entering into the twilight zone of disruptive military technology now, where we're getting kind of prickly and sticky. This is that $10 laser, and then $15 a pop. Other comments? Yeah.
What's the Iron Dome though in Israel? Isn't that lasers?
That's really old technology, actually. Iron Dome is a weapon system that employs 3 or 4 levels of interceptors for different incoming projectiles or weapon systems. So you have the Iron Dome, which is short-range mortars and things like that. Then you've got Arrow 3, which is kind of medium to high. And then you've got David's Sling. I love the way they use
Yeah.
to take out the big ones. No pun intended. Other comments or questions?
I'm sorry. What about, so we talked about a lot of technology, but what about just being able to hack into foreign systems, like their computer systems that run their economy, military thing, just hacking into that and disrupting lights, whatever, in another country? Would that be?
Seth, correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, I can't remember. It was about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago where the North Koreans engaged in some provocative action on the Korean Peninsula, and that night, all the lights went off over all of North Korea. And that was, my son says that was the United States saying, good night. It happens every day. It happens every day. And I'm sure that the adversary, and we have capabilities that we don't want them to know, that would be utilized only in a war situation, but that happens all the time. My son perpetually goes into bad people's computers all over the world and looks at what they're doing. It's interesting.
Have they come up with any way of blocking the radio signals and all these drones?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One photo I didn't put in was, and they've been around for a while.
RF blockers.
They have what they call drone guns, and they literally, the Russians were some of the first to have them, and what you do is you point it at the drone and you push the trigger in it, and it releases radio signals which interrupt,
Block the
but interrupt the signal, and they just go out of the sky. The Ukrainians have them, we have them, we have whole systems that do that. They were sending a United States Navy ship with Marines on it through the Persian Gulf. This is several years ago. And the Marine Corps has an anti-drone Humvee that they've created. The system's on top of a vehicle. So what they did was they put the vehicle on top of this ship and strapped it to the deck. And yeah, there's all kinds of capabilities. There are some drones that are very difficult to intercept, and I'm not sure what the guidance system is, but it's almost impossible right now. I don't know how they do it. So if someone does, but they're very difficult to take out because there's some guidance system that it's not operating on a,
Right, super ultra high frequency that also is encrypted.
yes.
But during, all during the wars, even Afghanistan, we were jamming radio frequencies, and it would be a certain spectrum of frequencies that would be jammed constantly, because there would times come in when other branches would submit a request for a radio frequency, but they couldn't be loud because it was in that band of that radio frequency that was being jammed. So they had to figure something else out.
By the way, the Ukrainians have gotten so adapted at anti-drone technology that they're exporting it now. Some of you may be aware of that, to Arab countries and to the United States.
You were saying about the thing that can knock out drones from the sky, but the Russians have been not just sending 1 or 2 or 3 a dozen, but maybe 100. So how do you knock out 100 of them at once?
So there are, that's called a swarm when they do that, and sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's hundreds. And there are larger arrays. There is one that's called Leonidas. The name that they gave this is not unintentional, where Leonidas, King Leonidas,
Oh, yeah.
stands in the gap and fights off tens of thousands of Persians
That's why
to save Sparta.
Yeah.
King Leonidas, well, this weapon system that we are developing is called Leonidas, and it's a unit, and you just go like this with it. And I saw it being implemented, and there was they just drop out of the sky by dozens.
Yeah.
Into the Persian Wars, like in Greece, when the Spartans were,
So
they
the
were
system-
in a narrow pass.
I threw that in there for you, Tom.
More Persians out.
Leonidas.
Yeah. Another thing about Damocles Sword that's interesting, there's an ancient myth about a man who wanted to be a king. So the king says, sure, you can have all my luxury, just sit on the throne and all this stuff. Then he's having a good time, and he looks up and he sees the sword hanging by a horsehair thread over his head. This could drop on me any time, I'm not secure here. But what makes this interesting is that the king was actually a fellow named Dionysius.
The second.
Yeah, that's right. And he was his official title, and he lived up to it, was tyrant. That was his title.
The tyrant of Syracuse.
The tyrant of Syracuse.
I read the article that was sent.
Yeah, I did too, yeah.
Well,
Syracuse.
any other comments or? Well, so we just got that shift to the 16th of July next month, and
Yeah.
it'll be the third Thursday, not the second Thursday. But thank you for coming tonight.
Yeah.